The plains rolled endlessly, golden with late summer grass, the wide sky stretching so far it seemed to swallow the earth. By the curve of a quiet river, the cowboy's stallion grazed lazily, its muscles shifting under the sun. Then suddenly the horse froze, head raised, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at a scent carried by the wind. A sharp neigh shattered the silence, piercing and urgent. The cowboy, working on a weathered fence not far away, straightened instantly. He knew his stallion's voice. It was no ordinary call. Dropping his tools, he strode across the brittle grass. The horse stood stiff, staring into the reeds by the water's edge, tail lashing like a whip. The cowboy followed its gaze, pushing aside the tall stalks, and there she was. A woman lay half hidden, her dark hair tangled, her skin marked with dust and blood. She wore an Apache dress, suede fringes torn, beads scattered with dirt. Her arms and legs bore cuts, bruises, and one deep gash that had crusted over with dried blood. She looked as though she had been running until her body gave out. For a moment he thought she might already be gone. Then her chest rose faintly, shallow but steady. He dropped to one knee. The horse lowered its head too, nuzzling her shoulder as though urging her awake. Slowly her eyelids fluttered. Her gaze met his, sharp with fear, though dimmed by exhaustion. With a weak groan she tried to move, to push herself back, but she had no strength. The cowboy raised both hands, palms open. "Easy now," he said gently, his voice calm and even. "I won't hurt you." She murmured something in her own tongue, her words faint, broken. He couldn't understand, but her distrust was clear. Her hand clenched against the ground as if she might still fight. He slipped his arm carefully beneath her shoulders. She groaned, her fingers clutching his shirt in pain. "I've got you," he said firmly. Lifting her against his chest, he carried her toward the small log cabin that stood at the edge of his land. The horse followed closely, its eyes fixed on her, hooves crunching with each step like a silent guardian. Inside the cabin he laid her on the cot. She tried to resist, her pride flaring even in weakness, but exhaustion pressed her down. He fetched water, strips of clean cloth, and his tin of salve. With careful hands he cleaned her wounds. Her leg had swollen badly. Her arms bore scrapes from thorns and rock. She winced with each touch, but she endured silently, refusing to cry out. By the fire's glow she spoke again in broken words. He caught fragments, chase men, escape. She had been pursued, hunted away from her people, driven into the valley by men who sought to harm her. She had run through the night, stumbling until she collapsed near the river. The cowboy listened without interruption, his weathered face grave. He had seen cruelty in these lands, but her story cut sharper than most. That night, while she slept fitfully, he sat by the fire with his rifle across his lap. He watched the shadows, every sound magnified by silence. Outside, the stallion stood near the window, snorting softly as if keeping his own vigil. Morning brought a faint strength to her. She sat upright, though stiff with pain. When he offered food, simple bread and stew, she hesitated. Her eyes studied him warily, but hunger overcame her doubts. She ate small bites at first, and he saw in her expression a flicker of reluctant trust. In the days that followed, she spoke more. Her English was halting, but enough to share pieces of her world. She told him her name, strong and short, and of her people's dances, the songs that rose with the fire at night. Her voice carried both longing and sorrow, as though every memory was a wound and a treasure at once. The cowboy listened with quiet respect. He had spent his life among cattle, storms, and fences, yet he realized how little he truly knew of the lives beyond his ranch. Her words opened a horizon wider than the one before his eyes. As she healed, she often walked slowly to the river, gazing at the horizon. Her body still hurt, but her spirit was restless. She longed for her family, her people. The cowboy saw it in her face, but said nothing. He knew what it meant to ache for a place you belonged. Still, he stayed alert. He kept his rifle close, his eyes sharp on the ridges. Whoever had chased her might still be near. Then, one evening, the stallion grew restless again. It pawed the earth, ears flicking toward the horizon. The cowboy stepped outside and saw dust rising faintly in the distance. Riders, he counted 5. His jaw clenched. Inside, the woman's breath caught. Her eyes widened in recognition. She whispered quickly, fear lacing her words. These were the men who had pursued her before. She urged him to let her slip away, to not risk his life. But he shook his head, voice like iron. "You're not running anymore. The thunder of hooves rolled closer. The men slowed as they reached the cabin, fanning out. Their leader, scar cut across his cheek, sneered as he called out, demanding the woman. His voice was heavy with entitlement. The cowboy stepped onto the porch, rifle leveled across his arm. "She's not yours." "Turn back." The men laughed cruelly, dismounting. "Step aside, old man," their leader spat. The woman stood at the doorway, her hands trembling, but her eyes fierce. The cowboy planted his boots firmly on the porch. For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them all. Then, when one rider drew for his gun, the cowboy fired first. The rifle cracked like thunder, and the fight began. The first shot echoed across the plains like thunder. One rider staggered back, his revolver spinning from his hand. The rest roared with rage. In an instant, the quiet land became a battlefield. Dust rose in a choking cloud as boots pounded and hooves struck the earth. The cowboy worked his rifle with calm precision, every motion sharp and practiced. He had seen gunfights before, but this was different. This wasn't about cattle or land. This was about life itself, the woman's and perhaps his own. He fired again, ducked against the porch post, then swung out to strike another. A bullet split the wood inches from his head, spraying splinters across his shoulder. The stallion reared high, neighing so loud it cut through the gunfire. It charged one rider, striking him down with iron hooves. The man tumbled, screaming as the horse kicked again, sending his weapon flying into the grass. The animal, wild-eyed, circled back, placing itself between the cabin and the attackers like a warrior, of flesh and bone. Inside the doorway, the woman clutched a knife. Her body shook, but her grip was steady. She watched the chaos, the cowboy holding his ground, the horse fighting like a creature sent by fate. When one rider tried to circle behind, she darted forward. With a cry torn from deep within her chest, she slashed across his arm. The man shouted, stumbling back, blood staining his sleeve. Her own terror fueled her strength, and in that moment she was no longer prey, she was a fighter. The fight stretched on every second like an hour. Smoke stung their eyes. The sharp stench of powder filled the air. The cowboy dropped one man with a clean shot, then another. He moved like steel hammered by years of survival, refusing to yield. The woman's knife flashed in the firelight of the porch. The stallion stomped and struck, a living wall of fury. Finally the tide broke. Two men lay sprawled in the dirt, unmoving. Another writhed, clutching his leg. The survivors scrambled to their horses, dragging their wounded, panic overtaking their arrogance. The scarred leader glared at the cabin, rage twisting his features. He clutched his bleeding arm and spat into the dust. "This ain't over," he growled. Then, with a sharp pull on the reins, he wheeled his horse and fled, his men thundering after him. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the crackle of gun smoke fading into the dusk. The cowboy lowered his rifle, chest heaving. The woman stood still, knife in her hand. Hair wild around her face, dress torn, but her eyes fierce with defiance. The stallion pawed the ground once, then stepped closer, pressing his head against her shoulder, as if to say it was done. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The only sound was the wind sighing over the grass. Then, slowly, the woman whispered, "You fought for me." Her voice trembled. Not from fear, but from something deeper. "You did not have to." The cowboy shook his head, reloading the chambers of his rifle. No one should stand against men like that alone. Her gaze softened, and she stroked the stallion's mane, whispering words in her tongue, ancient, melodic, full of gratitude. The horse leaned into her touch, eyes calm once more. She turned back toward the cowboy, her expression shifting. In that moment, he saw not just the wounded woman he had carried from the river, but the unbroken warrior she had always been. That night, the cabin was different. Where silence had once felt heavy, it now felt warm. She cleaned the scratches on his arm, her hands steady as she worked. He sat quietly, letting her tend to him, their unspoken bond weaving tighter with every glance. Outside, the stallion stood guard, his shadow long in the moonlight. In the days that followed, her wounds healed fully. She walked without a limp, her shoulders squared with pride. Sometimes she laughed, a sound the cowboy had never known in his home. She spoke more freely, telling stories of her people, their dances, the firelight songs, the strength of her ancestors. She shared dreams of returning, of seeing her family again. The cowboy listened, knowing the time would come when she would leave. Each day he rose early, worked the land and rode with her across the plains. She sat tall in the saddle, braids streaming behind her, her spirit alive. He watched her with quiet respect. Knowing she carried something stronger than wounds, she carried resilience, and it humbled him. Finally, the day came. She stood at the river where he had first found her, eyes bright with purpose. "I must go back," she said softly. "My people wait for me." He nodded, though his chest felt heavy. "Then I'll see you there." Together they rode across the valley. The land stretched wide, alive with the whispers of wind through the grass. The journey was silent, but it was not empty. At the edge of the ridges, where the trail curved toward the mountains, she dismounted. The cowboy stopped, reins loose in his hand, watching her. She stepped close, her eyes deep with gratitude too vast for words. She pressed her hand against his chest, right above his heart. "Because of you," she said firmly, "I return not broken but whole." He tipped his hat, unable to speak. She turned then, walking toward the mountains, her figure shrinking against the horizon, framed by endless sky. The stallion snorted, shifting beneath him, watching her until she was gone. The cowboy rode home slowly, the wind carrying her words long after she disappeared. His cabin waited, the silence different now, filled with memory, with fire, with the knowledge that for a brief, fierce crossing of paths everything had changed, not just for her but for him too, and for the horse who had seen what he could not, who had found her when fate demanded it.